Well, to talk about this, I'm joined by three people here in the studio at the European Parliament. We have Diana Wallis, who is Vice President of the Parliament, also a British Liberal Democrat, and you're responsible in the Parliament for transparency issues. We have Jana Mittelmeier, who's the head of the NGO Transparency International here in Brussels, at the EU office. We also have Edward SCICLUNA, who is a Maltese MEP from the Socialist Party, and also the Vice President of the Economic and Monetary Affairs Committee here. Diana, this case has highlighted a number of issues, one being the easy access that the Parliament gives to lobbyists, the other being the corruptibility, potentially, if these criminal investigations confirm that, of some of its members. How is the Parliament going to react? You've been meeting with some of the senior members of the Parliament this week.
Well, I think, first of all, there were things already happening in terms of having a register for lobbyists, which is a project we've been working on with the Commission for some time now. But the problem has always been, in Parliament's view, that this register is voluntary, not mandatory.
And MEPs, to be clear, wanted it to be compulsory, mandatory.
We wanted it compulsory. That has been Parliament's stance throughout the negotiations.
Right. So why isn't it?
I think that the Commission felt it was a step too far. There have been various allegations that there was some legal problem, but I really don't buy into that. And I think if there is a will there, and I jolly well hope after what's happened there will be that political will, because frankly, had we had a mandatory lobby, there is an argument that this wouldn't have happened.
Well, you wouldn't have got a group of journalists in posing as lobbyists, but it wouldn't have actually addressed what is arguably the more fundamental issue, which is that it appears that MEPs were prepared to accept money to make laws.
So we would have dealt with one side of the equation, but we still have to deal with what's necessary on the other side. And there I think, well, we can talk about greater transparency in relation to where amendments come from, and that has been something that many of us in the Parliament have thought should be addressed by what's called a legislative footprint. But the other issue is code of conduct that is much more robust.
Yes.
Now, the Commission has put its house in order in that respect. I would like to see our Parliament do that, possibly backed up by some sorts of ethics committee or place where MEPs can seek advice if they think they're in a difficult situation.
Because when, Jana Mittelmeier, when you look at what's actually in place, and as Diana says, it's not nothing, but it is surprising. There isn't a code of conduct or an ethics committee, that kind of thing. Is this the sort of thing your organisation is calling for? Do you think what Diana's talking about would be enough?
Transparency should be the absolute, rule in this question. Ultimately, when you look at the current provisions that regulate the behaviour of European parliamentarians, this is really only a potpourri of provisions, and it's not near anything that we would call a code of conduct that can ensure integrity, ultimately. I mean, there are some small, steps towards the right direction. As you said, the sort of transparency register that covers the Parliament and the Commission, but that is going far too slow in our assessment, and of course it should be mandatory. And when we look at rules for European parliamentarians, I mean, clearly what we are promoting is a complete overhaul of the transparency system of the European Parliament. We need to look at the whole picture and make a proper assessment of what needs to change now after the scandal. Obviously, I mean, the interaction between parliamentarians and lobbyists is sort of, we shouldn't demonize it ultimately. And
you shouldn't demonize it.
No, you shouldn't demonize it, but you need to regulate it properly. You have to have a legislative footprint, as you said. You have to have a proper declaration of financial interests, but also of membership interest. And those information need to be updated in real time, not only once a year as it stands at the moment.
Yes, absolutely. Now, Edward SCICLUNA, you're a new, relatively new MEP from Malta. I understand you don't meet with lobbyists one-to-one anyway.
No.
Why not? Don't you think it's useful?
No, I find, I've written about it several times and even on television programs because I find it really over too much done, and I feel it, the insist, especially in the Economic Committee, because of the amount of regulations and legislations being passed there. We were inundated, and pestering and so on. So I just drew a line, and I just meet in public meetings. However, I'd prefer that the public meetings are not done in the wine and dine area, but done in the committee itself. We have some of them, but I think we need more, like the US, where the industry comes there, like in the dock, and we're asking the questions to the public, and they are answering, rather than getting phone calls, and, I don't like them at all.
Now, you're scrupulous, clearly, about how you deal with lobbyists, and yet you yourself have been criticised for what some have called a conflict of interest. Now, can you explain that to us?
No, that's a really interesting story, because on the wave of this scandal, a Brussels correspondent of a newswire ran a story about an MEP who actually wrote the hedge fund laws. And this MEP is also running two hedge funds in his country.
That MEP allegedly was you.
Owned by a bank.
Yes.
And to my bewilderment, I found my name, which is not true. However,
But it is true, is it not, that you hold a non-executive position on two investment funds in Malta?
No, it's not true. I didn't write any hedge funds.
Fine. But you are the vice chair of the Economic Monetary Affairs Committee.
Yes.
Now, this raises an issue,
which is ethics, which does not exist.
Yes.
However, I have to have my own. I mentioned part of it about meetings and so on, and the outside activities which I carry out, I feel there is no conflict. I know what is a conflict of interest.
No, but it doesn't look necessarily good. And I suppose the issue is, should there be a conflict? Should there be a code of conduct, an ethics committee to perhaps advise MEPs like yourself, to say, well, it doesn't look that good, Edward. Resign your directorships or whatever. Or it's absolutely fine. I mean, would that help to negotiate this? Because this is another issue as well, isn't it?
Of course it does.
Would you welcome that?
Of course I do. One would need the comfort of the guidance rather than perceptions, because perceptions, if they're in the court of law, a lot of people will be hanged just because they perceive to be guilty.
But, Joanna, where do you stand on this? I mean, do you think that MEPs should be holding positions like this when they are on committees that, Edward did not write amendments on hedge funds, but your committee does deal with that issue and does legislate on that issue. Is that appropriate?
European parliamentarians who hold special positions, such as the position of a shadow rapporteur, a rapporteur, or writing amendments, being chair of a committee, etc. They should step back and think of what kind of second jobs they have, and then there's obviously one thing that needs to be done immediately is to declare, the interest in the declaration, and then secondly, to take steps to eliminate any sort of conflict of interest and potential conflict.
Well, I mean, this is all on your website.
Yes, but he must sort of probably actually step down from either of the two, positions.
Look, 10 years ago, a group of investors and small investors and pensioners came together, put up a standalone fund which invests in Maltese bond funds and equities, and they got a bank to do it for them, and they pay them a fee. They elect me to represent them, to make sure that this is done. I'm on the side of consumer. I don't feel there is the industry. I don't owe anything to the industry because of that. Because
and I don't want to focus too much on your case.
But
the issue, and it's good that you've come on the programme to talk about it, actually, Edward, but the issue, Diana, is that we know that there are many, many members of this House who are taking money for advising corporate clients, large amounts of money, actually, on pieces of legislation which either they will deal with on a committee level or in a plenary session. Is that appropriate? And while we're talking about the House and the way it acts, is this an area you want to see acted on?
Yes, I do. And I mean, if there are people who are taking money for advising about the political process that they are engaged in my mind, that is absolutely unethical and it can't be allowed.
And it is going on, isn't it?
It's got to be sorted out.
Is it going on, Diana?
I don't know.
You know
some people
don't you? I mean, it's on people's websites, isn't it?
Seem to think it's far more prevalent than I do. I don't think it's that prevalent, but I think it needs sorting out. I think members need guidance as to what is correct and what is unacceptable. But to say that, because we've had 3 cases that were highlighted by a form of entrapment, I don't think that means that every member is doing something that's wrong. And I think you have got to get the balance right in how you approach this. Most of us, as Edward has already said, feel under an enormous pressure and spend most of our time saying we won't see lobbyists. Please can they put it in writing, because we just haven't got the hours in a day to do it.
I mean, any payment that is accepted by an MEP must be declared. Full stop. And
Yes.
in real time, not only once a year.
I'll come to you, Edward, in a moment. I just want to say, though, I mean, is it not important to respect that line between expertise and conflict of interest? And there is a very clear one. And is it not useful in this House, where you MEPs are dealing with such technical, difficult legislation, to have members who come from backgrounds? For example, you were, I think, the chair of the central bank in Malta. This is useful. This is not a conflict of interest. This means that legislation is better framed.
Absolutely. I mean, the MEPs, they need to consult with lobbyists and with citizens and with business and with everyone. I mean, there's no doubt about it.
Yes.
But here, I mean, the difference between, consultation and to be informed and to meet experts, and on the other side, corruption, is clearly when MEPs accept payments for these services. And that needs to be declared to ensure that this can't happen.
It's clear there are grey areas that would help.
There are other weak areas, especially in the drafting of the legislation. In our committee, we've got a very complex and difficult piece of legislation: dark pools, over-the-counter derivatives, hedge funds, credit default swaps.
I'm glad you find it difficult.
Well, we do,
Yes.
and that's the problem. I mean, we have a group of highly qualified MEPs in our committee. However, they would still sometimes rely on the industry suggesting those amendments. And that's the dangerous spot.
Yes.
I would prefer if we have resources which are independent, and they would scrutinize them and see who are they favouring, especially in highly complicated legislation.
So you don't rely on lobbyists in that way?
This has been the other thing, I think, post-Lisbon, that some of us want to see. The policy and drafting advice available to members has to be increased so that we get away from these off-the-shelf amendments that are circulated by lobbyists, so that members feel stronger about what they themselves want to put on the table coming from an independent source.
But this, of course, is very far from the cases that we've seen, which are extreme and, if they're confirmed by these investigations, possibly criminal as well. Has the Parliament got a role, just to go back to that, Diana, because you are one of those responsible for this area, has the Parliament got a role in taking action against these individuals, if it comes to that?
Well, I think what's been alleged here is very serious, and one has to appreciate that members are elected in their individual countries, and they are subject to the criminal law in those countries. The authorities there are best placed to conduct a criminal investigation and to impose appropriate penalties. We do not have that power, and we do not want to compromise any proper judicial investigation under criminal law. So we must let that happen.
Edward, do you believe that these cases are an exception, or do you think this is going on
these
elsewhere?
are outright crimes. You find them in various professions. And I think we should more concentrate on the main, where all the MEPs are concerned, the rest of the MEPs who are well-meaning, how to help them and guide them.
Jana?
I agree with Diana that national criminal investigation should be started as soon as possible in all 3 cases. And obviously, the European Parliament should cooperate also with the national authorities. If possible, immunity should be lifted in those cases where it's still necessary. And but beyond, this scandal, ultimately, we have to look into the future. We have to actually look at the system and correct the mistakes and strengthen it in order to protect the parliamentarians that work properly.
Well, as we've heard, that is in fact underway, and we'll be following that. We expect to vote after Easter by the committee and then by the full Parliament, and we'll be there.